The underground auction hall reeked of desperation and stale alcohol. Dim lanterns cast flickering shadows across the stone walls, illuminating faces twisted with greed and indifference. Omegas stood in iron cages along the perimeter, their eyes hollow, their spirits broken. This was where the unwanted came to be sold, those rejected by their packs, abandoned by their families, or traded like livestock for debts and vices. In the farthest cage, pressed against the cold bars, sat Arya. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her pale face, and her thin frame trembled beneath a torn dress that had once been white. She couldn't hear the jeers of the crowd or the auctioneer's booming voice. She'd been deaf since birth, living in a world of perpetual silence that had made her an outcast even among outcasts. Her father had brought her here 3 hours ago, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. He'd shoved the cage door shut without meeting her gaze, pocketed a handful of silver coins from the auction master, and disappeared into the night. Arya had watched his retreating back through the bars, her heart shattering into pieces she'd never be able to reassemble. The auctioneer, a portly man with greasy hair, gestured toward her cage. She could see his mouth moving rapidly, see the way the crowd leaned forward with cruel curiosity. Some pointed, others laughed, a few looked away, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but not uncomfortable enough to intervene. The cage door swung open. Rough hands grabbed Arya's arms and dragged her onto the raised platform. She stumbled, her bare feet scraping against splintered wood. The auctioneer gripped her chin, forcing her face toward the crowd, displaying her like merchandise. His fingers left red marks on her jaw. Arya's eyes swept across the sea of faces, searching for anything, compassion, mercy, humanity. She found none. These were men who came to buy broken things, who saw Omegas as property rather than people. Her silence, her deafness, made her even less valuable in their eyes. Damaged goods. Then she saw him. He stood at the back of the hall, partially obscured by shadows, but his presence commanded attention like a blade drawn in darkness. He was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and a posture that spoke of absolute authority. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were the color of molten amber, burning with an intensity that made Arya's breath catch. Alpha. Every instinct in her body recognized it, even if she couldn't hear the whispers rippling through the crowd or smell the dominant pheromones that surely accompanied his presence. The auctioneer's hand moved in a downward motion. The bidding had begun. Arya watched as various men raised their hands, their expressions ranging from lecherous to calculating. She knew what awaited her with any of them, a life of servitude, abuse, used until she broke completely and discarded like refuse. The tall alpha at the back raised 2 fingers. The auction master's eyes widened. His mouth moved frantically, and several bidders dropped their hands immediately, their faces paling. Whoever this alpha was, his reputation preceded him. One man, scarred and cruel-looking, raised his hand in challenge. The alpha's expression didn't change. He simply raised 3 fingers. The scarred man hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back into the crowd. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down. The sound was silent to Arya, but she saw the finality in the gesture, saw the way the crowd parted as the alpha moved forward. He walked with lethal grace, each step measured and purposeful, like a predator who'd never known defeat. He stopped before the platform. Up close he was even more imposing. His face was carved from granite, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips pressed into a hard line. His eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them. Not the mate bond. She would have felt that despite her deafness, but something else, something inexplicable. The auction master handed him a leather-bound contract and a quill. The alpha signed without reading it, then produced a heavy pouch that clinked with gold. Not silver. Gold. Arya's legs nearly gave out. He'd paid a fortune for her, a deaf, broken Omega worth less than livestock. The alpha turned to her fully, his hand extended, palm up, in a gesture that was unmistakably an offering rather than a command. His eyes held a question she didn't understand. Arya placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, calloused, impossibly gentle. He helped her down from the platform, his other hand steadying her elbow when she swayed. The crowd parted before them like water. Arya kept her eyes on the ground, shame burning through her chest. She was property now, owned, purchased. Whatever life awaited her would be at this Alpha's mercy, and she'd learned long ago that mercy was a luxury Omegas, like her, didn't receive. They emerged into the cool night air. A sleek black car waited at the curb, its engine purring. The Alpha opened the back door and gestured for her to enter. When she hesitated, he didn't force her. He simply waited, patient as stone. Arya climbed in. The leather seats were soft, foreign. She'd never been in a car this expensive. The Alpha slid in beside her, maintaining a respectful distance that surprised her. Most Alphas would have already asserted their dominance, already made their expectations clear. The car began to move. Arya stared out the window, watching the seedy auction district give way to cleaner streets, then to tree-lined roads that led out of the city entirely. Where was he taking her? To his pack? His home? What did he want from her? She risked a glance at him. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, one hand clenched into a fist on his thigh. Whatever thoughts occupied his mind, they weren't pleasant. Then something impossible happened. A voice echoed in Arya's head. Deep, resonant, primal. Not words exactly, but feelings, images, sensations, confusion, anger. Not at her, but at the world that had put her on that auction block. Determination, protection. Arya gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The Alpha's head snapped toward her, his amber eyes widening in shock. He'd heard her reaction, but more than that she'd heard him. Not with her ears, but with something deeper, something that transcended physical sound. His wolf. She could hear his wolf's voice. The Alpha's expression transformed from shock to wonder. His lips moved, and though Arya heard nothing, the voice in her head spoke clearly. "You can hear me." It wasn't a question. It was awe. Arya nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone in silence. For the first time, someone could reach her where she lived, in that quiet, isolated place she'd inhabited since birth. The Alpha's hand moved slowly, telegraphing his intention, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The voice in her head was softer now, tender in a way his face couldn't quite manage. "You're safe now. I promise you that. Whatever you've endured, whatever they've done to you, it ends tonight." Arya didn't know if she could believe him. Trust had been beaten out of her long ago, but as the car carried them deeper into the night, toward whatever future awaited, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Chapter 2. The Voice in the Darkness. The car wound through dense forest for what felt like hours. Arya watched moonlight filter through ancient trees, their branches creating patterns of silver and shadow across the road. The Alpha beside her remained silent, at least vocally, but his wolf's presence hummed in her mind like a constant, steady heartbeat. She'd never experienced anything like it. The voice didn't use words the way humans did. Instead, it communicated in waves of emotion, in images and sensations that bypassed language entirely. She could feel his wolf's curiosity about her, its fierce protectiveness, its confusion about why a deaf Omega could hear what others couldn't. Arya had no answers. She'd been tested by pack healers as a child, examined and prodded until her mother had given up hope of a cure. The verdict had been unanimous. Her physical ears were damaged beyond repair. She would never hear the world the way others did. Yet here she was, hearing something impossible. The car pulled through massive iron gates bearing an intricate wolf insignia. Beyond them stretched a compound that took Arya's breath away. A sprawling mansion of dark stone and glass rose from the forest like something from a dream, or a nightmare, depending on one's perspective. Lights glowed in windows, warm and inviting, but the sheer size of the place was intimidating. The Alpha exited the car and came around to open her door, again offering his hand. Arya took it, her legs unsteady after the long journey. She stumbled on the first step, and he caught her instantly, his arm around her waist, steadying her against his solid frame. His wolf's voice flooded her mind. "Careful. You're exhausted. When did you last eat?" Arya couldn't answer. She had no way to communicate back, and the question made her realize she couldn't remember her last meal. A day ago? 2? The Alpha studied her face, his amber eyes taking in the shadows beneath her eyes, the hollow of her cheeks. His jaw clenched. Without warning, he swept her into his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. Arya stiffened in shock, but his wolf's voice was gentle. "Don't fight me. You can barely stand." He carried her through ornate double doors into a foyer that gleamed with polished wood and crystal chandeliers. Several people stopped to stare. Pack members, Arya realized, recognizing the way they moved, the hierarchy evident in their postures. They watched their Alpha carry a bedraggled Omega, with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. The Alpha ignored them all. He climbed a grand staircase and walked down a long hallway before shouldering open a door. The room beyond was larger than any space Arya had ever occupied. A massive bed dominated one wall, covered in soft fabrics. Windows overlooked the moonlit forest. Furniture that looked expensive and comfortable filled the space. The Alpha set her gently on the bed. His wolf spoke, "This is my room. You'll stay here tonight where I know you're safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out proper accommodations." Arya shook her head frantically. She couldn't stay in his room, in an Alpha's room. That meant things, expectations. The Alpha seemed to understand her panic. He knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I won't touch you. I sleep in my office half the time anyway. You need rest, food, and safety. That's all this is." His wolf's voice resonated with sincerity, with a depth of honor that made Arya's chest ache. She nodded slowly. The Alpha stood and moved to a closet, returning with a soft shirt that would dwarf her. He set it on the bed, then pointed to a door, the bathroom, Arya assumed. "Clean clothes, hot water, take your time." He turned toward the exit, but Arya's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist before she could think better of it. He froze, looking down at where her small fingers circled his arm. She needed to ask something, but had no voice. She'd learned basic sign language as a child, but few people outside her family had bothered to learn it. Still, she tried, her hands moving in the symbols she remembered. "Why?" The Alpha stared at her hands, then at her face. His expression cracked, revealing something raw beneath the stoic exterior. He tapped his temple, then his chest, and his wolf's voice filled her mind. "My wolf knew. The moment I saw you in that cage, he knew you were different, important. I don't understand it either, but I trust him. He's never been wrong." Arya released his wrist, overwhelmed. The Alpha nodded once, then left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone, Arya sat in stunned silence. She looked around the opulent room at the soft fabrics and warm lighting, and something inside her broke. Tears came in great, racking sobs, for the years of isolation, for her father's betrayal, for the auction block and the cruelty and the endless suffocating silence of her life. But also, impossibly, tears of relief. Because for the first time someone had chosen her, not out of obligation or pity, but because their instincts had told them she mattered. She didn't know what the Alpha wanted from her, didn't know if this kindness would last, or if it was merely the calm before another storm. But tonight, she had hot water and clean clothes and a bed softer than clouds. Tonight, she could hear a voice in the darkness, and tonight, that was enough. Chapter 3. The Court of Whispers. Arya woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory flooded back. The auction, the Alpha, the impossible voice of his wolf in her mind. She sat up slowly, her body aching from years of poor sleep and poorer nutrition. The Alpha's shirt hung to her knees, soft against her skin. Someone had left a tray of food on the nightstand while she slept. Fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and water. Her stomach growled painfully at the sight. She ate ravenously, barely tasting, driven by hunger so deep it bordered on desperation. Only when the tray was empty did she notice the folded clothes at the foot of the bed. Simple but quality. A soft sweater, jeans that looked like they might actually fit, undergarments still tagged from a store. Someone had gone shopping for her. The thought made her throat tight. Arya dressed quickly and ventured to the door. She pressed her ear against it, a useless habit from her hearing days, then slowly turned the handle. The hallway beyond was empty. morning light filtering through tall windows. She walked cautiously, trying to remember the route from last night. The mansion was enormous, hallways branching in multiple directions. She descended the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the polished banister. The foyer bustled with activity. Pack members moved with purpose, some carrying papers, others engaged in conversation. Several stopped to stare at Arya with undisguised curiosity. A few showed hostility, their lips curling in sneers she couldn't hear but recognized nonetheless. An older woman approached, her silver hair pulled into an elegant bun. Her mouth moved in what looked like sharp words, her expression disdainful. She pointed at Arya, then at the stairs, clearly telling her to go back where she came from. Arya took a step backward, old fear rising in her throat. She didn't belong here. She was an intruder in this world of power and privilege, a deaf Omega who'd been bought like property. Then the Alpha appeared. He descended the stairs behind her, and the entire foyer fell silent. She could tell by the way every head turned, every body language shifted. He wore dark clothes that emphasized his imposing build, his amber eyes cold as they swept across the gathered pack members. He stopped beside Arya, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, not possessive but protective. His wolf's voice filled her mind. "No one here has permission to speak to you that way. You're under my protection." The older woman's face paled. She bowed her head in submission and backed away quickly. The Alpha turned to Arya, his expression softening. "I need to attend pack business. Will you wait for me in the library? Second door on the left. No one will bother you there." Arya nodded. Relieved to escape the hostile stares, she found the library easily, a massive room lined floor to ceiling with books, comfortable chairs positioned near windows that overlooked gardens. She settled into a chair, trying to make herself invisible. She lasted perhaps 20 minutes before the door opened. 3 young women entered, their designer clothes and confident postures marking them as high-ranking pack members. They saw Arya and stopped, whispering among themselves. One, a stunning blonde with calculating eyes, approached. Her lips moved in exaggerated slowness, as if speaking to a child. Arya didn't need to hear to understand the condescension. The blonde pointed at herself, then at the Alpha's office door, making gestures that clearly indicated a previous relationship. She smiled cruelly, her message obvious. "You're temporary, replaceable." The other women laughed, their body language mocking. One made a gesture of coins exchanging hands, reminding Arya that she'd been purchased, bought, nothing more than a transaction. Arya's eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. She stared at the floor, willing herself to disappear, to become invisible as she'd learned to be her whole life. The door slammed open. The Alpha stood in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. His eyes swept across the 3 women, and Arya watched them shrink back, fear replacing their smugness. His lips moved in words Arya couldn't hear, but she felt his wolf's rage like a physical force, waves of dominance that made her own Omega instincts want to submit. The women fled, practically running from the library. The Alpha moved to Arya, kneeling before her chair. His hands hovered near hers, asking permission. When she nodded, he took her hands gently in his larger ones. His wolf spoke. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you that pack politics are vicious. Many here don't understand why I brought you home. They think they know what you are to me, but they're wrong." Arya raised her eyebrows in question, her heart pounding. What was she to him? The Alpha struggled visibly, his jaw working. Finally, "My wolf calls you Alikira. It's an old word. It means heart listener. Someone who hears what others can't. Someone chosen by the wolf itself, not the human. It's rare, precious, but it doesn't mean what they think." "What does it mean?" Arya signed, hoping he'd understand. He watched her hands carefully, his brow furrowed. He didn't know sign language. Frustrated, Arya pointed to her chest, then to him, then made a questioning gesture. Understanding dawned in his eyes. His wolf answered, "It means you're important to my wolf in ways I don't fully understand yet. It means you're under my protection, always. It means I will never let anyone hurt you again. What it doesn't mean, what I need you to know is that I won't force anything. You're not here to warm my bed or serve me. You're here because my wolf insists you must be, and I've learned to trust his instincts." Arya's breath caught. She searched his face, looking for deception, for the manipulation she'd learned to expect from alphas. She found only honesty, confusion, and something else, a fierce determination to keep his word. His wolf continued, "I want to teach you to communicate with me, not just through my wolf, but in ways the pack can see. I want you to feel safe here, to find your place. But it will take time, and you'll face opposition from those who don't understand. Can you be strong enough for that?" Arya thought of the auction block, of her father's betrayal, of every cruel moment that had led her to that cage. She thought of the impossible gift of hearing this alpha's wolf, of the promise of protection she'd never had. She nodded. Slowly, firmly. Yes. She could be strong enough, because she'd survived everything else, and for the first time she wasn't surviving alone. Chapter 4. The Song of Souls. 3 weeks passed like a dream. The alpha, whose name was Kale, she'd learned through his wolf, began teaching her each evening. Not formal lessons, but conversations conducted through his wolf's voice and increasingly creative gestures. He brought books with pictures, wrote words on paper, slowly built a vocabulary they could share. Arya learned that Kale was king of the Northern Territory, that he'd built his pack through strength and honor, that he'd never taken a chosen mate despite pressure from his council. She learned that his wolf was ancient and wise, more than just the beast that lived beneath an alpha's skin. And she learned that she was changing. The good food, the safety, the absence of constant fear, it transformed her. Color returned to her cheeks. Her hands stopped shaking. She walked the mansion halls with less hesitation, though many pack members still watched her with suspicion. Kyle's beta, Marcus, was kind to her. He'd learned basic signs so they could communicate. Kyle's younger sister, Eleanor, befriended her despite her brother's warnings about pack politics. Slowly, tentatively, Arya began to believe she might have a place here. But the blonde from the library, Sienna, daughter of the pack's most influential elder, grew increasingly hostile. Arya felt her cold stares, saw her whispering to others, watched the way she positioned herself near Kyle at every pack gathering. One evening, Kyle's wolf spoke to her with unusual intensity. "The full moon ceremony is in 3 days. The pack will run together, and I must lead them. You'll need to stay in the mansion where it's safe." Arya nodded, but disappointment crashed through her. She'd never participated in pack hunts. Her deafness made her a liability, but she'd hoped. What? That somehow things would be different here. Kale's human eyes studied her face, reading the emotion there. His wolf continued, "It's not because of what you can't hear, it's because you're not pack yet, officially, and until you are, there are those who might see the hunt as an opportunity to challenge your presence here." "Sienna," Arya signed, making the letter S and pointing in the direction of the pack elder's home. Kale's jaw tightened. "Among others, my protection only extends so far when wolf instincts take over during the full moon. I won't risk you." That night, Arya couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her new room, smaller than Kale's but still luxurious, watching moonlight paint the forest silver. She felt the pull of the moon in her blood, the omega instinct to run with the pack, to belong to something larger than herself. She'd never belonged, not really. She was Kale's charity case, his strange pet project, the deaf omega his wolf inexplicably wanted nearby. But she wasn't pack, wasn't family, wasn't... A howl split the night. Arya couldn't hear it, but she felt it. A vibration in her bones, a stirring in her blood that made her gasp. Through the window, she saw wolves emerging from the forest. The hunt had begun early, or perhaps time had slipped away from her. Then she heard it. Not one voice, but many. A chorus of wolves singing to the moon, their howls overlapping in a harmony that transcended sound. Every wolf in the pack, their voices reaching her through whatever strange gift allowed her to hear Kale's wolf. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever experienced. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to the Song of Souls, to the voices that had been silent to her all her life, suddenly ringing clear and pure in her mind. She felt Kale's wolf among them, stronger, deeper, the melody around which all others harmonized, and she felt his surprise, his shock at realizing she could hear them all during the full moon, that whatever connection they shared was magnifying under lunar influence. His voice, urgent. "Arya, can you hear us? All of us?" She pressed her hand against the window, wishing she could answer, wishing she could tell him that yes, she could hear the pack, could hear the song of family and belonging and wildness that she'd been denied her entire life. The howling stopped. Arya watched as a massive black wolf, Kyle, separated from the pack and ran toward the mansion. Minutes later, her door burst open. Kyle stood there in human form, having shifted and dressed with supernatural speed, his eyes wild. "You heard them. You heard the pack." His wolf's voice echoed his verbal words, doubling the intensity. Arya nodded, crying too hard to sign. Kyle crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, the first time he'd embraced her, the first time he'd allowed himself to cross that invisible boundary he'd maintained so carefully. Arya buried her face in his chest, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength and safety he represented. "I don't understand what you are," his wolf admitted, honest and raw. "I don't understand this gift or why my wolf chose you or what it means. But Arya..." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "You're not alone anymore. You hear us. We hear you, even without words. Your pack now. Mine to protect always." Arya signed against his chest, her hands shaking. "Not just pack." Kyle stilled. His wolf went silent, waiting. Arya looked up at him, gathering courage for the truth she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. She placed her hand over his heart, then over her own. Not mates, that sacred bond hadn't snapped into place, but something else. Something chosen rather than fated. Something that whispered of possibility, of futures unwritten, of a deaf Omega and an Alpha King who'd found each other in the darkness. Kale's hand covered hers, pressing it against his chest, where his heart beat wild and strong. His wolf's voice was barely a whisper. Not just pack. Outside, the wolves howled again, their song rising to the moon. This time, Arya heard joy in their voices, acceptance, welcome. The pack singing for one of their own. She'd been sold at auction, bought for gold, brought to a strange place by an alpha, whose wolf heard something in her silence that others had missed. She'd been broken, unwanted, disposited like trash. But tonight, under the full moon with Kale's arms around her and the pack's song filling her mind, Arya finally heard the voice she'd been searching for her entire life, her own, and it was singing.